Have you read a post lately that just made you angry? And then to read the comments afterwards that only got worse from there. Does it seem like trolls follow you everywhere you go on social media? Anywhere you look, you find someone that has a negative opinion. But more than that, it just makes something inside of you angry. It's interesting that the Vikings had a position in their military, if you call it a military, they're warriors that were known as the Berserkers. Now the Berserkers, their job was to get as angry as possible before a battle. They would get themselves into this maniac state of just anger and rage. And they would prepare this way before they went into battle so that they could go just crazy on their enemy. Now the problem was that if they got angry too quickly and they got into this trance-like state of rage, then they would start taking it out on those around them. So sometimes as they are on their way to battle, they jump off the boat and they would wrestle giant logs floating by in the river or in the water around them, and they would wrestle them until they got all of that energy and rage out. But they tried to build it up in time just before the battle and then go into this trance-like state of rage. And then they would go against their enemies. And it was found that they were impervious to pain. They couldn't feel pain. They were so angry that they were like a missile that had been fired off at their enemy to take out anyone and everyone. They were a storm of violence and death. Anger has this ability to overtake our senses and our reasoning, our ability to reason, and takes away all of our logic. When we have a feeling of rage or anger, we don't think about the consequences. It's a defense mechanism that our bodies and our brains have. All of a sudden we feel this rush of adrenaline and all these endorphins hitting our body, and we can become consumed with it. Matter of fact, it can become addictive to some. Over time, some people might actually find it as comforting when they become angry. If you've ever repeated a conversation over and over in your head again and again, and you just become angrier and angrier as you think about all the things about this person or this object that you don't like, and you can feel the rage grow and build inside of you, the adrenaline starts to rush. It's almost a euphoric state, isn't it? Anger can be a dangerous and devastating thing. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 18 tells us that a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. Scripture warns us about anger and letting it rule our lives and the power that it has to destroy us from the inside. As a matter of fact, anger and hate can be closely associated, and they do more damage to us who are harboring those feelings than they do against the object that we have anger towards. The indigenous people group, the Inuits, believe that someone who shows anger is like a child throwing a tantrum. They haven't learned how to control their temper yet. And so it's this childish behavior. It reminds me of my 2-year-old daughter when as she's learning how to deal with her emotions that she's feeling and control those emotions. She has a hard time understanding what to do with them, and she throws tantrums all the time, and she screams to get her way, and she becomes angry, throws things, furious, and screams, wants everyone to know that she's angry. But she's a child. She's 2 years old, just learning how to deal with her feelings. And as the Inuit people say, this is a childish behavior for adults. Any adult that doesn't have control over their anger shows them to be childish. Whenever these feelings happen more and more frequently, it can be bad for our psychological and emotional health as well. Anger has a lot of negative impacts on those around us, not just us. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 19 warns us, "Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the hearts of fools." When we become addicted to anger, it can lodge itself into our heart, and it can begin to erode us from the inside out. Even though our outward appearance may not show us throwing things or punching walls or causing violence, inside it can eat away at our soul. If you see the title to an article that makes you angry, you're more likely to click on it. You're more likely to respond or like it or share it with any of your friends. And so it's what we call clickbait. It's put out there to evoke an emotion, to make you feel something a certain way, but an emotion that's going to cause you to react, which usually is fear and anger. We're being manipulated by marketers and by people that want to get ideas across to us by fear and anger. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, Paul is writing to Timothy, and he warns him. He advises Timothy to flee from youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with all those who call on the Lord with a pure heart. Anger can turn into an unrighteous action. Anger can be hurtful to those around us, and it can be hurtful to ourselves if we harbor it and we let it eat away at us. It raises our blood pressure. It literally does damage to our heart. Often, it drives us to violence. And violence is not Christ-like. Christ didn't teach us to be violent. Christ told us not to be violent, to turn the other cheek. We're commanded to do the opposite. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, Peter says, "For you have been called for this purpose, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you would follow in his steps. He who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in him. And while being abusively insulted, he did not threaten, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously." You see, we're to follow Christ's example, not react in violence, not allow the anger to overtake us like a berserker wrestling logs in the water, not to react in violent ways. We are to seek peace. And I believe the Inuits got it right. Rage is childish behavior. We are called to be wise and meek as doves, shrewd as serpents. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 4, Solomon shares wisdom to the future kings of the world. He says, "If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest." The next time that you feel angry, or you can start to feel that anger rise within you, take a breath. Count to 10. Just take a moment and think about your actions and their consequences. Use your strength to remain calm and choose the wisdom of peace, the wisdom of life, and the wisdom of God.